Doki Doki and Normal VN. Let's just call it Normal VN. This was an early mod. Supposedly when it was released it had been in development for 5 months, which lines up almost perfectly with the release date of DDLC. So yeah, it doesn't get much earlier than that. Full disclosure, I've heard bad things about this mod, not really anything specific that I can remember, just generally some negative things. So I went into it with humble expectations. This might have affected my judgment of it a bit, but in short, I'm gonna be a bit nicer for once. No shit, the first thing the mod tells you when you click new game is that, oh god, you're gonna have to replay Act 1. And there's a spelling error in the first piece of dialogue. This is a bad start. Oh, never mind. Better than purist confirmed. I do understand why mods do this. They want their story to rest upon the foundation of DDLC, but it's just boring, really. It doesn't take a genius to tell you why watching a rerun isn't exciting. This approach is better. It retraces very little vanilla stuff, and even then there's changes throughout, so you can get reacquainted with the characters without being bored. This is actually among one of my favorite introductions to any mod. It is very to the point. Normal VN starts off mostly through Act 1, where you pick who you want to help with the festival preparations, but instead of being limited to Yuri and Natsuki, everyone has a choice. You get to pick your route right off the bat. No bullshit, no mini games. There's a charm to this. I like it. Sometimes less is more. But let's take a step back here and talk more about how well this mod has aged. There are some things that aren't here that are just standard now, like transitions. Sometimes there's transitions, sometimes not. And as someone that has photophobia, sometimes when there's no transition, it can physically hurt me. Aside from that, there's a few modding issues, but it works. When we get into visual stuff, there is a huge reliance on color filtering to give scenes different tones, or sometimes just to set them apart. And that's only necessary because there's very few new assets. The filters act as sort of a band-aid upon this pretty big problem. Of the new assets, about half of them are used one singular time in the endings to the routes. This man actually put like half of his effort into a fancy ending and left very little to the rest of the mod. Granted, they are good endings, but still. At the end of the day, most of Normal VN's issues are due to its age. There were fewer community assets, the modding community itself was no doubt smaller and had less expertise, so there's a lot of things missing here that are really of no fault of the modder himself. But it being a product of its time isn't all bad. I'd say that Normal VN benefits in the same way that Love and Literature does. It managed to be written and made with very little influence from the modding community itself. And I have to say, there's sort of like a meta established now. A lot of mods tend to take large influences from other mods, and this makes it feel kinda incestuous. So it's always a positive when a mod has some social distance and does things a little bit differently. Hell, somehow this mod managed to not bore me with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Natsuki's dad, Sayori's depression, Yuri's self-harm, etc. All of those well-trodden plot points. It managed to make doing those somewhat interesting. I'd say that maybe that borders on being a spoiler, but let's be honest, this is a DDLC mod, come on. So, how has it aged? I think that depends on the person. If you're like me and you don't care too much for graphical stuff, I'd say it's aged a little bit. It's aged slightly poorly, but not enough to really matter. A large part of why it hasn't aged poorly is because it's well written. I'll get into more detail about that later, but in short, it was really easy to get immersed into the story, even in spite of its relatively bad visual aspect, and the modding part also being kinda bad at times. It is definitely carried by its writing. Even then, the writing has a few issues here and there. Here's a scene where Sayori and Natsuki quote-unquote argue about whether cupcakes or cookies are better. Now, this is just silly, and I like this scene at first because it's this light-hearted slice of life thing. I got some Lucky Star vibes. It's all in good fun between friends, right? But then the MC totally fucks up the scene by taking it seriously. Clearly the writing intended for this to be more serious than it came off as, but honestly, how serious could a disagreement over your favorite baked good really get? This is ridiculous, and this scene would have worked better if it was just kept lighthearted as it seemed to be. The MC just melodramatically putting them down over something silly like this is just disappointing. The only other issue I had with the writing has to do with Sayori's route, which I'll get into later. Before we move on to the routes, I do want to talk about the structure of this mod. Here's basically how every route goes. Festival preparations. The festival. Oh, my waifu's in one of my classes. Oh no, I have to make a minor sacrifice to help my relationship with her. Horror movie scene. And it goes on from there. The scenes have the same premise, but many details are changed, and I have to give them credit for not being ultra lazy about it. While the idea of the scenes are the same, I don't think I can name two scenes that felt too similar. As I played through my last route, which was Sayori's, it did start feeling repetitive, but I think that was because of the lack of new assets making everything sort of blend together, rather than the writing's fault. That being said, if you play this, I'd recommend you play your best girl's route and leave it at that. You'll get the best part that this mod has to offer without some of the larger issues. This mod is formulaic, but it's a good formula, and I think that this mod would have suffered if the writer had to slog out completely original concepts for scenes time and time again for each route. Most mods make it obvious that they want each route to be this unique experience. They want each girl to have their own completely unique scenes and backgrounds and soundtracks, so each route is completely different. Summertime and Purist both did this very well. But this isn't always an option, especially for mods with a small team or sometimes no team. This mod does recycle content, but it does so in a very tasteful and interesting way. There's no copy pasting here, at least to no more than the average mod. Doing the scenes this way also allows the writer to focus less on the big picture and instead focus on smaller details, which, if the quality of the writing in this mod is any indication, this definitely worked. It made a big difference. At the end of the day, for a small mod like this, all they needed was a few good ideas, and they just focus on making those ideas work. And did those ideas work? Well, some of them are kinda cheesy. Oh, someone has to be really scared of the horror movies so they get real close. Yeah, no, I see how it is. But these scenes are just fun. Not only are they well done, but I could tell quite a bit of thought went into making them. Similar to other mods and vanilla DDLC, the protag acts different based on who he's around, and let's just say, sometimes he's the scared one when the horror movie comes up. Mannequins. Sadly, no matter who you watch the movie with, you still miss about 5 minutes of it, but it's nothing important. Stuff like this, it's tropey, it's silly, but hey, not every mod has to be some super emotional epic. Sometimes you just need a mod that's fun. Remember, we're talking more or less the same community that voted for We Are the Literature Club as most lighthearted, a mod with suicide in the first minute of it. Nonetheless, this is a fantastic change of pace from most mods where they try to develop into some sort of epic drama. Oh, and if you're gonna try to do the epic drama thing, don't do the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. It's fine to half-ass it in a mod like this where the conflicts aren't as important, but by God, if you're trying to develop into something deeper and tense, you can't do the same 4 story beats that we've seen done like 50 times and spun like 40 different ways. Don't do the Natsuki's dad, Yuri's self-harm, etc. Like Sayori's depression, they've been done to death. Alright, the routes. Spoilers beyond this point, skip here to avoid them. Starting with Natsuki's, and no one's gonna be surprised by this, but hers was the best in my opinion, although not by a huge margin. I do feel like there was just a bit more effort put into her route, and the evidence for this is pretty easy to find. For example, she's the only one that got new sprites outside of the ending, and no, Monika's casual clothes don't count. She's also the only one that shows up in the scene just prior to the festival, which felt like a touch that could have been added to just about any of the girls' routes if they wanted to, but they didn't, and I don't think there's really a reason why. It's just a detail that is in Natsuki's route and not in the others. I like this route a lot, and I won't spoil much of it because I really enjoyed it, and I want you to play it if you haven't already. I'll just say that if you like the original interpretation of Natsuki with few artistic liberties taken, I think you'll like this route a lot. The only way this route could have been better is if there wasn't any Natsuki's dad trope going on, but it was just used as a way to push the plot forward, which is fine. Also, for context, when this mod was made, it wasn't an overused trope, so context. I just sort of wish it was a bit longer, but hey, you know, either you die a hero or you live long enough to see the meeting her abusive dad subplot, because it's fucking coming. Monika in this is a slightly unique take on her character. She's a bit more on the dominant side, which feels a little different compared to Vanilla. She's still an overachiever, she's still good at everything, all that, but I like Monika in this mod because it shows her controlling side, but without her essentially being a god. It's just sort of what Monika would manifest into as a real person. There is nothing more boring than when a mod does like Summertime or Purist did and removes the only rough characteristic that Monika has, is that she's this controlling and kind of borderline psychopathic person. And look, I understand not wanting Monika to be a total prick to everyone, but she has to have some depth to her character other than slightly dominant anime girl with green eyes and talks to the player instead of the in-game character. Maybe if you're lucky she's a bit philosophical, but we always tend to forget the fact that she knowingly murdered her friends. I guess it could have happened to anyone, right? That being said, this mod doesn't remove that character trait, rather it just changes the way she expresses it. In this route, it almost feels like there's some subtle hints, some red flags that she's going to be an abuser, like each girl has a favor that she asks of you after the festival, and hers is by far the most destructive. She's an overachiever, right? She loves her grades and she wants to get a good grade, so she asks you to sabotage your own grades for her. Good grades for me, but not for these, smiling Monika.jpg. Then let's just say she does some borderline sexual stuff, and, you know, on its own it might be largely innocuous, but using sexuality to get what you want is obviously pretty questionable. Image unrelated, I don't know why I put this in the script looking back, but sometimes you just leave things in because they're quirky, and so I'm gonna leave this in. Anyways, back to talking about Monika's route, and the fact that she's really jealous and wants to stop Sayori and the MC from being friends. And I have to say, despite liking Natsuki's writing a bit more, this was a really cool way to spin this character, and the writing was more than enough to sell her as this borderline abusive and controlling person. As a rule, the characters and conflicts in normal VN are really good. Monika's route in particular has quite a bit of conflict, and I have to say, they always feel realistic. In most cases with mods, there's always some level of like, oh, this feels forced, but there was none of that in this. Monika's conflicts organically rise up from her controlling nature and how she tries to reel people in based on that. It's established really well and it feels realistic. Her early conflict where she freaks out at the rest of the club has probably one of the best portrayals of passive-aggressive rage I've ever seen. And when she ends up having to apologize, it just feels like she's doing it to save face. This is really good. I like this writing a lot. Okay, let's move on to Sayori's route. This is the worst. I'm not going to be soft about this. Even from the start, this is a poorly written route, especially compared to the rest of the mod. For some reason, Natsuki just sorta gets herself wound up and suspects that Sayori might commit suicide. I guess maybe she just has really good intuition, but if she does, it's for the wrong game. Aside from that, this route has an astonishing amount of inconsistencies. I've gotten pretty used to handling her. Is it too early for a relationship? Bruh. Your own dialogue later on says, remember the 5th grade, Sayori? And you didn't think to change this? Also, the MC says, and she's looking forward to meeting up, but then says, I haven't heard from her since the day she left. I mean, he's probably right, Sayori's like a depressed puppy, but it's the principle of the thing. You don't know that for sure, MC. I won't harp on it too much, you get the point. There's a lot of inaccuracies, many of which are probably because they're originally vanilla dialogue that wasn't properly adapted for the new story, which, I gotta say, 5 months in development, and I've seen scenes in this that really had like minor, inconsequential changes based on what route you're playing, and yet these major problems weren't changed. Same scene, same context, everyone yells at Yuri to fuck off, a natural reaction to seeing Yuri, of course. In Natsuki's route, Yuri runs away and bumps into someone. In Sayori's route, it happens in a different background and she notices the crowd and gets scared instead. All that attention to detail over such a small thing that you could have just copy-pasted, but you didn't bother with these major issues in Sayori's route? Speaking of attention to detail, a cool little detail in this is that in Natsuki's route, she sort of picks up the Sayori MC thing about 2/3 of the way through her route. She just like strolls into the MC's house like it's nothing, something that takes an immense amount of trust. I was really impressed by that little detail, and the mod doesn't rub it in your face, it's left subtle. And you might wonder why I went off on a tangent. I'm supposed to be talking about Sayori right now. Well, I don't know, she cries a lot in this. If you saw my little skit video I made about this mod, that pretty much properly condenses Sayori's route. She cries a lot and sometimes for no reason. I've said it before, I'm not much of a Sayori fan. This route isn't particularly bad, but in my opinion, Sayori routes often suffer from the issue shown in this chart. You'd be hard-pressed to find a truly awful one, but finding a truly good one is similarly difficult. They tend to be very mediocre. And I think that this is because there's not much you can really do with this character. At the end of the day, Sayori is the depressed girl that pretends to be upbeat and bubbly, and depression is this really strong feeling. It's really hard to right a feeling wrong, especially when it's something as sacred to people as depression. But in this route, she spends half her time crying. Is that doing depression wrong? I don't know, it's an emotion, a feeling. You can't write something subjective wrong. Although at the same time, that doesn't mean it's interesting either. On top of that whole thing, I have to say, it sort of felt like the writer didn't want to make this. It feels half-assed compared to the other routes, but could you really make a mod like this and have every girl with a route except for Sayori? Probably not. Yuri's route was pretty good, I'd say it tied with Monika's. It's interesting that her and the MC only hanged out privately like 10 times in 6 months. I don't know if that's what I would call a relationship, but that's just me. In spite of that little detail, Yuri is actually an introvert in this, which many mods don't do. Allow me to explain. Summertime as an example, we all know what Yuri is. She's this very introverted and timid person, but in summertime she's always leaving her house. She goes to a park, she goes to a pool, she goes to a movie theater. Is that really true to the introverted and not terribly confident Yuri that we all know and love? Not really. And that's not a bad Yuri, I didn't dislike that Yuri. It's just that there's more liberties taken with that version of the character. Yuri's also sort of like a nihilist in this, which was a cool concept to me and an interesting internal conflict for her. As someone that was a nihilist in high school, it was awful and I hope she grows out of it like I did. No one deserves that. But yeah, Yuri's route was good, I just don't really have that much to say about it. In closing, I do think that this mod did everyone justice outside of Sayori. I'd give Natsuki's route an A, Monika and Yuri's a B+, and Sayori is probably a D. Like I said before, there's not really much you can do with Sayori. She's probably the most locked-in character in DDLC because of the childhood friend thing and the constant hints of depression. There's no wiggle room, there's no artistic liberty there. Not only is she a character that her shtick gets old quickly, there's also nothing else you can really do with her, so yeah. For all of its issues, Normal VN was really good. If you want a lighthearted and minimalistic mod with really good writing but not much else, look no further. This is it. It's really good if you can look past its imperfections and if you keep in mind when it was made as to why it might be lacking in some ways. For what this mod might lack in polish and visual uniqueness, I do feel like it makes up for in writing and charm, and it feels unique in spite of what is, let's be honest, this is a really stale concept, so I think that they did really well with what they had. To quickly cover the conflicts, generally speaking this mod is lighthearted as I've mentioned before, but there are a few conflicts here and there, and they are really well presented and put together. Of course, this is excluding the obligatory Sayori depression plot that lasts her entire route. By the way, nah, it doesn't get old, trust me. It never got old. I wish the Sayori route was longer so I could empathize with her depression more. I really wish I could do that. Quick summary of the routes. I really liked Natsuki's dynamic with the MC, Monika's was definitely interesting and different from what I'm used to seeing, Sayori's was a bit below average but has all of the right characteristics of a Sayori route. One minute she's okay and all lovey-dovey, the next thing she's breaking down and the MC is trying to help her. Not a fan myself, but if your fetish is being a shoulder to cry on, I'm sure you'll love it. Yuri's was one of the better Yuri routes I've seen, although I think the mod's formula of only meeting at the MC's house for the entire last half of the mod probably suits her the most. And while I do think that there are definitely better Yuri routes out there, I also think that this is probably the most accurate to the original interpretation of her character. I said at the start that I've heard a lot of bad things about this mod, and I have to say, they're kinda warranted. This is not a mod for everyone. But having gone into it expecting something kinda bad, I was pleasantly surprised. There's a lot of fresh stuff in here, and it's a lot of fun if you don't go into it wanting anything too dramatic or serious. 8 out of 10. This is some rough Kino right here, a diamond in the rough. Some of the best, most charming writing I think I've seen in this community, but unfortunately hindered by an over-reliance on vanilla assets as well as some other smaller issues. Sorta like Thought Club. If you really want to enjoy this, go into it expecting what it is. An early mod that has really good writing, next to no graphical variety, subpar modding quality. It isn't meant to be perfect, but what it does set out to do, it does really well. And it's a lot of fun. This is one of those rare mods that I just had to play all in one sitting. Well, that's all she wrote. Thanks for watching. Bye.